I remember the gray morning at the Detroit clinic like it was a pulse behind my ribs. I'd gone in for a routine prenatal check, thinking the worst I might hear was high blood pressure or slow growth. I wasn't prepared for the tremor in Dr. Bennett's voice when he started the ultrasound. "Oh my," he murmured, leaning closer, eyes scanning the screen. "Olivia Carter. Dr. Mike Carter is your husband? Listen. Near him, I'm powerless, and if he finds out I warned you, you're in serious danger. Leave the house. Get a divorce as soon as possible." I froze. My body refused to move, my mind splitting in two, disbelief on one side, terror on the other. Shadows surrounded the baby where there shouldn't have been any, subtle but deliberate, and my blood work didn't lie. Compounds in my system that didn't belong. "This isn't normal, Run." "No." His words echoed, and in that moment, I realized life as I knew it had ruptured. And for the first time, I understood I was on my own. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 31, I live in Detroit, and until a few weeks ago, I believed I knew what love looked like. I used to think trust was something you handed over, whole and unquestioned, to the person who promised they'd keep you safe. I was wrong. Mike made it easy to believe in him. He cooked healthy meals, brought expensive supplements home, and monitored every detail of my pregnancy like I was some personal experiment. "You need more iron," he'd say, measuring out powders into tiny plastic cups. "This one will help the baby's heart." I never questioned it, not really. His hands lingered at the small of my back, brushing hair from my face, whispering, "I've got you." At first, it felt like care. But care has edges, and his ones were sharp. He charted my moods, asked about my appointments before I scheduled them, subtly redirected my conversations. He didn't shout, didn't slam doors. He smiled while closing the cage. I remember the nights he stayed awake beside me, watching me sleep, insisting he was protecting both of us. I remember the warmth, the calm, the illusion of safety. It's only now I can name it control. Every gesture that felt like devotion was a thread in a net, and I was walking blindfolded into it. I look back at those weeks and wonder how I didn't see it, how I didn't feel the first twitch of wrongness. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I was too busy believing that love could feel like constant attention, that trust could feel like obedience. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what made the betrayal so complete. I sat alone in the clinic room, the hum of machines filling the silence. My hands were folded over my stomach, a small, protective gesture that suddenly felt futile. Dr. Bennett's eyes didn't leave the screen, but there was something in his jaw, tension, fear, maybe both, that made my chest tighten. "Olivia," he said softly, then paused as if weighing each word. "Dr. Mike Carter is your husband? Listen. Near him, I'm powerless, and if he finds out I warned you, you're in serious danger. Leave the house. Get a divorce as soon as possible. Run now." He pointed at the screen. "The shadows around the baby shouldn't be there. And your blood work shows substances that don't belong in a normal pregnancy." I blinked, tried to swallow, tried to speak, but my throat had turned to cotton. My life had always felt predictable, like a rhythm I could step to. But now, everything was jagged edges. "The vitamins, the supplements," I whispered, barely audible. "Could he?" Dr. Bennett didn't answer. He didn't need to. His expression said it all. I was in danger, and the danger wasn't random. It was close. I wanted to scream, to run, to claw at the walls of the clinic, but instead, I felt frozen. I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, the intimacy I had trusted weaponized against me. And in that quiet, clinical room, I realized that the person I loved most was also the person I needed to fear the most. When I left the clinic, the air outside felt heavier than usual, like the whole city had slowed down to watch me unravel. Cars moved, people talked, but I heard nothing, just the echo of Dr. Bennett's voice looping in my head. "Leave the house. Get a divorce as soon as possible." I walked across the parking lot gripping my purse so tightly my fingers ached. Inside were the vitamins Mike had packed that morning, still rattling in their bottle like evidence. I stared at them through the clear plastic, those neat, harmless-looking pills, and felt my stomach twist. At the car, I slid into the driver's seat and just sat there. The silence was too loud. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over Mike's name. For a second, I thought about calling him, pretending everything was fine, listening for guilt in his voice. But then I saw my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes swollen, face trembling, and I couldn't do it. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and wept. Not with rage. Not even fear. I cried because the truth hurt in a way I didn't know truth could. When the tears finally stopped, I turned the key. The only thought left in my head was one simple, trembling decision. Go home, but not to him. By the time I reached my parents' house on the west side, dusk had turned the sky a tired blue. My mom opened the door before I could knock. One look at me, and she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into her arms, murmuring, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." My dad stood in the doorway behind her, jaw tight, eyes scanning me like he was gathering evidence. He'd spent 25 years as a cop. Silence from him meant storm. When I finally told them what Dr. Bennett had said, something inside him shifted from worry to fury. He didn't yell. He just went to his study, picked up his phone, and said, "Find everything on Mike Carter. Work, accounts, history. If there's anything to hide, I'll find it." That's when I first heard the name Darius Fields. A retired detective, sharp as ever, someone my father trusted when the system failed to see. While Mom made tea, Dad took notes, already building a case before I finished crying. Watching him, I realized this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about exposure, about truth. And somewhere between my father's resolve and my mother's quiet prayers, I stopped feeling helpless. The hunt had begun. Darius Fields showed up the next morning wearing a gray coat and a look that said he'd seen everything once, maybe twice. He didn't waste time on sympathy. He listened, nodded, and said, "If Mike's hiding something, he's not as clever as he thinks." By the end of that first day, he'd already started tracing Mike's bank transactions, payments to private labs, anonymous transfers routed through shell accounts. Pharmacies logged under my insurance number but picked up by someone else. Maybe he thought I'd never notice, I told Darius. He gave a quiet laugh. Maybe he thought you'd suffer in silence. The next few days felt like living inside a slow explosion. Darius uncovered messages Mike had deleted, clinic emails encrypted under medical jargon, and receipts from a biotech nonprofit tied to something called Project Aurora. The name alone made my skin crawl. Each discovery peeled away another layer of denial. Mike wasn't just unfaithful, he was methodical. Every word, every touch, had been rehearsed to keep me compliant. I started to see our marriage for what it had become, a controlled environment. At night, I'd sit in my old bedroom at my parents' house, staring at the walls I'd once covered with college photos, trying to process how far from safety I'd drifted. But beneath the heartbreak, a new feeling began to rise. Cold, steady determination. He thought I'd never walk. He thought I'd break quietly. But the deeper Darius dug, the more certain I became. Mike Carter had built a world on lies, and I was going to be the one to bring it down, piece by calculated piece. Darius called one night, his tone different, sharper, colder. "Olivia, we found her." Her name was Kelly Johnson, a nurse. Younger than me, working at one of the clinics Mike used. The connection was unmistakable. Messages between them painted the picture. Late-night meetups, coded exchanges, her pregnancy, his too calm response. Darius read the texts aloud, his voice heavy. "Once she loses the baby, we can move forward." My stomach turned. She was me. The so-called vitamins Mike insisted I take weren't supplements at all. They were precise doses of hormones and experimental compounds, small enough to pass as nothing, strong enough to trigger a miscarriage without suspicion. I sat in silence, every breath feeling foreign. Love didn't just rot, it plotted. Mike had turned my body into a test site, my pregnancy into data. I didn't cry that night. I just whispered. He wanted control of life itself. And for the first time, I realized I wanted justice more than I wanted him to pay. We met at a cafe downtown, the kind of place we used to visit on Sundays after church. I chose the table by the window, bright, open, impossible to corner me. When Mike walked in, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You look tired," he said, sitting across from me. "You shouldn't be out alone." I slid a small USB drive across the table. "Here's everything," I said quietly. Your accounts, your messages, your project. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across his face. His hand twitched toward the drive, then stopped. You'll destroy me, he whispered. No, I said, standing. You did that yourself. I left before he could answer, walked straight to the precinct, and handed over the second copy to the officer on duty. Attempted homicide, pharmaceutical fraud, unauthorized medical testing. My voice didn't shake once. Outside, the cold air cut clean through my fear. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The war had shifted, and this time it was on my terms. When the police took my statement, they promised to review the evidence carefully. I'd heard that tone before, measured, bureaucratic, uncertain. That's when I realized I needed another kind of power, one that didn't ask permission to tell the truth. Tessa Brooks entered my life 2 days later. A friend of Darius, investigative journalist turned independent researcher. She met me at a diner on the east side, her notebook already open before she sat down. Darius told me you're not just a victim, she said. You've got evidence that could burn a few careers. Her directness startled me, but it was exactly what I needed. I handed her copies of Mike's transfers, the pharmacy logs, and a summary of Project Aurora. She skimmed them silently, lips tightening. We can't publish yet, she said finally. If we move too soon, they'll bury it and you. I stared at her. So what do we do? She smiled slightly. We plant seeds. Doubt. Whispers in the right circles. Make them think the storm's already here. It was the first time I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was strategizing. We mapped out timelines, contact points, people inside the institutions who might leak more. At night, I replayed Tessa's words in my head. Silence can be a weapon. The quiet before the storm wasn't weakness anymore. It was preparation. And somewhere between the files, the phone calls, and the sleepless nights, I began to understand something deeper. Vengeance shouts. Justice listens, waits, and then strikes. And when it does, it never misses. A week later, Tessa called me at midnight. Her voice was tight, urgent. Olivia, you need to see this. Now. We met in her small office near downtown. The room smelled like coffee and printer ink, papers stacked in waves around glowing monitors. On the screen was a folder labeled Project Aurora, AU07. She clicked open a PDF. My breath caught. Page after page of falsified consent forms. My name, my signature, all forged. Next to them were data logs detailing hormone levels, experimental compounds, and coded notes describing subject viability. Subject 07. That was me. Tessa scrolled down, showing payment records wired to Mike's account from shell organizations registered overseas, nonprofits that didn't exist outside the paperwork. Each transaction marked with the same reference, Aurora Trial Continuation Fund. They didn't just want a child, I whispered. They wanted data. Tessa nodded. They were running reproductive trials under the cover of private fertility research. You were never supposed to carry to term. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it. Every act of care, every word of comfort Mike had given me was just part of a script written by people who never planned for me, or my baby, to live. My father would have called it evidence. Darius would have called it leverage. To me, it felt like the final betrayal, a document turning my life into a lab report. Tessa closed her laptop. This isn't just about you anymore, she said quietly. If we move right, we can take down the entire network. I looked at her, tears burning but controlled. Then we move, I said. But this time, we do it on our terms. And just like that, silence became our ally again. The calm before a storm meant to change everything. Kelly Johnson resurfaced through a lawyer, claiming she wanted to make things right. At first, I didn't believe her. How could I? But when she met me in that dim conference room, shaking, clutching a folder full of screenshots and lab memos, I realized she wasn't lying. She was terrified. They said it was research for better fertility treatments, she said, voice trembling. Mike told me you knew, that you were part of it. I swallowed the bitterness that rose in my throat. And you believed him? She looked down. I wanted to. Until I saw the files. The injections. The notes about you. Tessa recorded everything. Kelly's testimony became a video confession. Clear, emotional, undeniable. We edited out names tied to ongoing investigations, but left enough to light a fire. Once uploaded to a secure server, Tessa set a time release. When the authorities received the encrypted documents, the video would go live to international media outlets. We didn't have to wait long. Within 48 hours, Project Aurora was trending in headlines worldwide. Governments demanded explanations. Institutions scrambled to distance themselves. Mike tried to run, booked a flight under an alias. But Darius was already waiting at the Detroit airport with 2 federal agents. When I saw his arrest on the evening news, I didn't cheer. I just sat on my parents' couch, hands over my stomach, breathing in the quiet. The justice I'd fought for wasn't loud. It was deliberate, precise. Kelly entered witness protection that same week. The rest, the labs, the accounts, the officials who'd signed off on the trials, fell like dominoes. Tessa called me that night. "You did it," she said. "No," I answered. "We did. But this isn't the end." Because for the first time, I understood. The fight had only just begun. Months passed, investigations deepened, and when the subpoenas finally arrived, I knew the storm we'd started had reached the courthouse. The courtroom smelled of paper and resolve. Cameras clicked softly as I took the stand, hands steady on the wood. I told the truth, not just what Mike did, but what the system allowed him to do. My words became part of the public record, and somehow, that felt sacred, like I was reclaiming every moment I had been silenced. When I stepped down, I didn't feel small or broken anymore. I felt finished, with him, with fear, with everything that tried to own my voice. By the time the verdict came down, the divorce was already finalized. It had been quiet, almost anticlimactic, no hearings, no arguments. Just a single envelope in the mail, his name gone from my life as neatly as it had appeared. And with that, the last thread between us finally snapped. Months later, my daughter was born. After hours of labor, she came into the world wide-eyed, her tiny fists clenched like she already knew what it took to survive. I named her Charlotte Rose after my parents, Charles and Rose, the 2 people who taught me that love isn't weakness, it's endurance. My parents were the first to visit, Dad whispering a prayer over her crib, Mom crying quietly beside him, touching Charlotte's fingers like she was blessing every part of her. The first nights, I barely slept, not out of fear, but out of awe. I stayed awake just to watch her breathe, to memorize the proof that miracles can grow out of the ruins. Weeks later, when the evening news anchor said my name, Olivia Carter prompted historic change in clinical experiment laws, I didn't smile for recognition. I smiled because pain finally had a name, and it wasn't mine anymore. The war hadn't destroyed me. It revealed me. And she, my daughter, was proof we'd won. Every time Charlotte smiled in her sleep, I knew the future had already forgiven the past. Did you enjoy the story? If so, hit like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. Thanks for watching Revenge with Keisha. See you next time.